This morning, the splashy sound of a major change coming to Twitter.
Dropping the famous blue bird logo for an X.
X. That little blue bird has flown the coop.
Elon Musk's decision to change the name of Twitter to X has been called one of the worst rebranding decisions of all time. But I think many people are failing to see the big picture, and I'm going to explain why Elon may ultimately prove us all wrong. No, I'm kidding. It's garbage, truly a terrible move. But maybe not for the reasons you think. No, it is for the reasons you think. It's completely and obviously bad. I'm sure you don't need me to reiterate the fact that X is a name that Elon has been obsessed with for years, which is at best generic or at worst pornographic. That the temporary logo he chose, which still hasn't been replaced almost 6 months later, was sourced via Twitter 24 hours before it went live, and was then found to be basically just a character pulled from an existing font, or the fact that to tweet is literally in the dictionary, or that in doing this he may have straight up destroyed something like $20 billion worth of brand equity. I think the better question at this point is, did he even succeed in changing the name? According to various polls, not really. So while the name Twitter is gone from the app, although twitter.com is still the URL that appears on my desktop browser for whatever reason, and the familiar bird logo is replaced with the letter X, to the majority of people, it's still Twitter. And while there has been a lot of talk of migrating to other platforms, and there are many high-profile accounts that have departed the site, Twitter, I'm not even going to make a joke here, I'm just going to call it Twitter for the rest of this video, is still more popular than its close competitors. Because despite all of the unpopular changes Elon's made, and the seemingly endless hordes of bots that have sprung up, and the controversial accounts that have been reinstated, I think that Twitter still kind of feels like Twitter. X still kind of feels like Twitter. Okay, I now see the problem with only referring to it as Twitter for the rest of the video. As a graphic designer, I've worked on a lot of brand identity projects over the years, and one creative director I used to work with liked to tell clients that your brand isn't your logo, it isn't the colors you use, it isn't even your name. Those are all elements of your brand, but at its core, your brand is the way that consumers feel about your company. I don't actually know if that's true, the guy was kind of an asshole, but it does make some sense. To use a couple overused examples, the name and iconic logo of Apple doesn't really have anything to do with computers. The first version of the logo also wasn't all that iconic, but over time, as the company flourished and the brand evolved, Apple came to be associated with sleek, well-designed technology that we use in our everyday lives. That's how the company's brand lives in the mind of consumers. The Nike swoosh may feel exceptionally appropriate for an athletic apparel company, but a big part of why it seems to fit so well is that Nike has cultivated that brand over many years to ensure people continue to associate it with quality and performance. And if either of these companies were to become embroiled in a massive scandal, it could start to erode that positive brand perception. And that has in some cases been an impetus for a rebranding, as opposed to, say, an impulsive billionaire's obsession with a single letter. There was no real reason Twitter needed to be called Twitter, and posts made on the site called tweets, but it was a very clever piece of branding with a simple, appropriate logo, and it stuck. Until it didn't. Again, to tweet is in the dictionary, alongside words like Google, or Xerox, or Velcro, or Band-Aid, all brand names that have become the common name for the thing they are. Can you imagine if Band-Aid changed their name to like Wonderstrip or something like that? And then when someone says, put a Band-Aid on it, you're like, no, you mean put a Wonderstrip on it. No, because that would be ridiculous and Band-Aid would never do that. Unless Elon decides to buy them as well, but fortunately, I don't think even he has that kind of cash lying around. Now, there certainly have been other very unpopular rebranding decisions made by large corporations. In 2010, Gap decided to change their recognizable logo to this, modern take. In 2009, Tropicana switched their familiar and appetizing carton design to this lifelessly minimalistic version. In 2008, Radio Shack decided they'd like to have people start referring to them as The Shack. I don't really have anything to add to that. The thing is, though, when most companies make a ill-advised branding move that receives a ton of public blowback, they usually do their best to reverse it. Gap's new logo was so unpopular that they changed it back in less than a week. Tropicana ditched their new packaging after less than 2 months and a 20% drop in sales. And Radio Shack filed for bankruptcy, although that probably wasn't totally the fault of the new nickname. As far as I can tell, when it comes to rebranding mistakes, there really is no comparison to Elon changing the name of Twitter. With the others, you can at least kind of see how it sounded good on paper. But with Elon, it really does seem like it was driven by nothing more than his own hubris and that weird adolescent obsession with the letter X. But okay, I told myself when I was writing this script not to put too many easy dunks on Elon into it, not because he doesn't deserve to be dunked on, but because it's all been said before and it really is just way too easy. I think there are like 4 ways this could all play out. Now, it should have been apparent to Elon the moment he even started hinting he was going to change the name to X that it was going to be wildly unpopular. I just don't think he cares. So it's hard to imagine a future where it suddenly dawns on him that it might be a good idea to change the name back. But you never know. Even though I said there was no direct comparison to Elon rebranding Twitter, there are a couple of recent examples of large tech companies kind of doing the same thing. In 2001, Facebook rebranded to Meta. But without getting into all the specific motivations behind that rebrand, there is of course still one key difference. The names of the services Meta offers that you're most familiar with have, at least for now, stayed the same. If someone complains that their relative became a conspiracy-addled lunatic from reading too many highly deranged Facebook posts, you don't need to correct them and say you mean highly deranged Meta posts. In 2015, Google became Alphabet, but again, that had nothing to do with changing the name of any of their services and everything to do with boring corporate restructuring that I'm definitely not going to get into here. When Elon announced Twitter's new name, it was immediately pointed out that a potentially wiser course of action would have been to name it Twitter X, or Twitter by X, or in some other way make it clear that Twitter is a service of the broader company X, while still retaining all the brand equity of the familiar bird site. It's funny to imagine various people at Twitter trying to gently suggest this to Elon. Like, hey, love the whole X thing, but maybe, possibly, we could just add it to the existing name? We can even make the logo black and white exactly like you want it. But maybe Elon is just too surrounded by sycophants and yes-men to even so much as hear that whispered in the halls. And now I'm dunking on Elon again. The point is, if Elon did decide he wanted to bring back the name Twitter, there are plenty of ways he could do that without giving up on his grand visions for X. But I kind of get the impression that those visions are so grand that the idea of bringing back Twitter rarely, if ever, crosses his mind. In a recent tweet, Linda Yaccarino, the CEO who Elon hired so that in theory he would be less involved in the day-to-day business of ruining the website, sorry, last one, explains that X, the everything app, is closer than everyone thinks. Indeed, the best justification for the name change is the idea that the app will eventually be far more than a place to just read culture war opinions so insane they make you think of humanity as a failed experiment. According to Elon's grand vision, eventually X will dethrone YouTube as the leading online video platform, dethrone OpenAI as the leading place to ask your browser dumb questions, dethrone banks as the gatekeeper of the global financial system.
Essentially, if done right, the X would serve people's financial needs to such a degree that over time it would become, I don't know, maybe half of the global financial system.
Wow.
Or some big number.
Look, you don't need me to tell you how skeptical I am about all this working out. But if it does all go the way Elon hopes it will, yeah, I suppose we would probably start to forget about the name Twitter if our entire lives began to flow through the X app. Maybe this is what Mark Zuckerberg ultimately wants too. No more distinctions between Facebook or Instagram, just one all-encompassing metaverse where we do everything. It's all a bit dystopian, sure, but we're used to that by now. And even if Elon falls a bit short of his goals with X, we may eventually just get worn down and stop calling it Twitter because we're bored. But maybe X is just such an uninspiring name for Twitter that it never catches on. Sure, in news articles and other professional communications, it will continue to be X, and the need to add a parenthetical formerly known as Twitter will continue to lessen over time. Although I did a search just as I was writing this and immediately found a USA Today article published in 2024, still calling it Twitter with no mention of X in the article. But in casual conversation, there's really nothing to force us to start calling it X. Maybe X will remain the official name, but colloquially, it'll always be Twitter. As of writing this, it's only been about 6 months since the name changed, but personally, I actually feel less inclined to call it X than I did when the new name was first announced. There was a brief honeymoon period where it was kind of funny to joke around about the new name and toy with the idea of actually calling it that, but now I think a lot of us have comfortably settled back into just calling it Twitter, and don't think too much about the fact that the app icon is a big X, unless you're making a long-winded video essay about it. Still, it's kind of hard for me to imagine nothing changing, that in 5 years X will still be more or less the same platform, and we'll still call it Twitter. Which brings me to the final possibility. You don't have to look very far to find about 1 billion articles explaining how Twitter is either dead or dying. And yeah, with advertisers pulling out in large part due to Elon's unfiltered tweeting and Elon telling advertisers to
go f yourself.
It does in many ways seem like only a matter of time before the whole ship sinks into the icy sea. Still, it's strangely hard for me to imagine. Will it just happen all at once, kind of like the X rebrand? One day it's there, the next the plug is pulled and no more Twitter? Or will it be a slow death, the service gradually degrading and putting more and more features behind a paywall until eventually all that's left are the users willing to fork over a monthly fee in order to screech into their echo chambers? I think the biggest barrier for most people, even those who really wish they could quit Twitter, is that it's simply quite tedious to try and rebuild your network of followers and follows on a different platform. So for now, at least as long as it lasts, many of us just keep going on Twitter more or less the same as we've always done. Sure, it seems worse in a number of ways, but at least in my little corner, it's not unbearable. I mean, just to be clear, I have no idea if I actually enjoy using Twitter or if I just do it compulsively. That's probably a question we should all be asking ourselves a little bit more often. So, out of these 4 possibilities, which one seems more likely? I mean, I don't know. As I said, it certainly doesn't seem like Elon would ever change it back, but dude is kind of a wild card, so it's certainly not impossible. I saw a random comment on Reddit suggesting that eventually someone else will buy Twitter and then they will restore the name, but even in my limited understanding, I think in order for Elon to sell the company, he would have to realize a massive loss, and honestly, at this point, who is going to buy it? To me, and I think to a lot of people, X really does feel like such a bad name that it's hard to imagine ever adopting it. But I think people who are fans of Elon and believe in his grand visions for X have probably already dropped the name Twitter and are quite happy to keep calling it X. And I was trying to make it through this whole video without bringing up politics, but as Elon has become more and more aligned with conservative ideology, more and more of his most ardent fans are people on the right. So maybe this will become just another battleground in our depressingly endless culture war, where by and large people on the right call it X and people on the left call it Twitter. Or it just fails, which ultimately might be a good thing for everyone. Anyway, there were a few times in the process of writing this where I decided to open up the Threads app, and every time I did, I would scroll for about 5 seconds before closing it, because it just doesn't feel the same.